How do you respond when the globe's biggest democracy chooses it doesn't require your approval anymore? You fight back fiercely. This goes beyond simple trade disputes. This concerns authority. And currently, India is escaping control. America recognizes this reality and feels anxious. During July's final days, ex-President Donald Trump warned of imposing 25% duties on goods from India. The stated explanation, unbalanced trade. The actual motivation, India advances rapidly while Washington dislikes losing command over what it cannot manage. Here's what many fail to grasp completely. India has moved past simply keeping pace. They're constructing an alternative tomorrow, making established superpowers extremely uneasy. Consider this. America has dominated global standards for more than 100 years, technologically, economically, and culturally too. Yet we're witnessing a different type of nation emerge. Rather than mimicking Western approaches, they're pursuing something much more intriguing, competing using their own methods. Today, India ranks as the world's fifth biggest economy, tracking toward third position before 2030 ends, likely surpassing both Japan and Germany. However, this extends beyond simple GDP figures. This concerns the nature of power India is developing. Examine these statistics. More than 1.4 billion citizens, with most being younger than 30. That represents a technology-powered population boom. Nearly 1 billion mobile devices, approaching 900 million web users by next year. You're observing the planet's largest connected democracy coming online simultaneously. What's remarkable is India's use of domestic innovations. Their UPI payment network doesn't just rival Visa and MasterCard, it exceeds them in processing volumes. ISRO, their space organization, successfully reached the lunar South Pole, spending less than typical Hollywood film buzz. D-jets. Additionally, they're organizing human space missions called Gaganyaan for 2026. Such advancement isn't coincidental, it's calculated. India pursues leadership positions in chip manufacturing, artificial intelligence, quantum technology, military production, and renewable power. Not through importing breakthroughs, but by creating complete systems. Through initiatives like Make in India, they're moving beyond discussions toward rapid expansion. Major corporations, Apple, Tesla suppliers, Google data facilities are relocating because India represents more than a marketplace. It's a production substitute for China. Given today's disrupted supply networks and changing partnerships, this development is enormous. What does America face because of this? Let's speak honestly. Washington expects to remain the central hub. When America makes requests, nations typically comply. But India operates differently. India pays attention, then decides independently. That's what DC officials are beginning to understand. India isn't developing into a conventional partner. It's evolving into its own power center. Independent, practical, and self-governing. This frightens policymakers, not because India acts hostile, but because it no longer seeks permission. Yet here's the fascinating aspect. This isn't about competition. This involves creating multiple power centers. The concept suggests tomorrow won't be controlled by one superpower, but influenced by several strong voices. India certainly represents one such voice currently. Therefore, America experiences pressure. Trump's tariff warnings are reactions. However, don't confuse reactions with reality, because India's growth isn't meant to challenge others. India rises because it finally possesses the capability. For 1 billion people who've waited generations for opportunity, this isn't threatening. This represents fate finally arriving. When you question why America suddenly emphasizes trade gaps and Russian petroleum, understand this: it transcends economics. The world realizes India no longer follows others. It's prepared to guide. Now let's examine the actual mechanisms driving Trump's 25% tariff warnings against India. This isn't some random political gesture or attention-seeking headline. It's a deliberate action motivated by pressure, power changes, and honestly, outdated beliefs about how global influence operates. Begin with commerce. America has historically assumed its markets represent the reward, and entry requires attached conditions. For years, this approach succeeded. America possessed the deepest resources, largest consumer base. ace and technology everyone desired. But advancing to 2025, the situation has transformed. India no longer produces exclusively for American consumption. They're manufacturing for themselves and the remaining world. Trump's advisors claim Indian exports, fabrics, automotive components, electronics, medicines receive unfair American market access while U.S. products encounter high Indian tariffs. They describe this as excessively one-sided. Examining raw statistics, they're somewhat correct. Consider this example. Typical Indian duties on American agricultural goods reach approximately 39%. U.S. duties on Indian products stay closer to 5.7%. But here's the complexity. India contains 1.4 billion people. Many inhabit rural or semi-urban regions, simply flooding markets with American grain, dairy, or wheat, while expecting local farmers to survive isn't realistic. This isn't trade protection, it's economic preservation. India's administration attempts lifting hundreds of millions from poverty without destroying rural livelihoods simultaneously. Yet for Trump, complexity isn't the focus. Control represents his priority. His trade philosophy doesn't center on mutual benefits. It focuses on winning more. If you purchase Russian petroleum, acquire Russian defense equipment, and restrict American agriculture from your markets, he'll apply pressure. That defines the Trump approach, simply stated. When India continued acquiring Russian S-400 systems despite CAATSA warnings and began importing reduced-price Russian oil during Ukraine's conflict, Washington took personal offense. Not because India broke treaties, they didn't, but because they made independent choices that couldn't be accepted. Let's discuss strategy. America currently engages in intense rivalry with China. They view India as Asia's natural balance. But here's the problem. America desires India as a partner while expecting junior partner behavior. That situation won't continue. India seeks strategic independence, the liberty to conduct business with America, Russia, France, Japan, or anyone they select. This isn't rebellion. This represents diplomacy within a multipolar environment. Why now? Why did Trump publicly announce tariff threats in July 2025? Because he's campaigning. He wants American voters seeing his toughness on trade, China, and anyone not playing fairly. India became his newest target, not from weakness, but from visibility. The contradiction is this. India's growing power increases pressure on them, not just from adversaries, but from allies too. Power creates friction. Trump understands this. He's using India as demonstration, warning other nations. Follow American terms or face consequences. But this logic has problems. It assumes old strategies still function, that tariffs and threats will force countries back into compliance. What it overlooks is a new generation of confident, self-sufficient nations unafraid to pursue their own directions. India isn't abandoning America. They're simply not surrendering to it. That's what truly provoked Trump. Here's something people overlook. India has stopped playing binary games. They're not selecting between East and West. They're constructing their own network. Think of it as a new operating platform, one not dependent on single app store. Yes, it's flexible, adaptable, and designed for independence. Yes, India purchases Russian defense equipment. That's established knowledge. But the larger story, India diversifies faster than nearly any other country globally. They're not trapped in Cold War alignments. They've moved beyond alignment. Over the past 5 years, India has concluded major defense and technology agreements with America, France, Israel, Britain, and Japan, all while preserving Russian partnerships. Consider the Rafale agreement. That wasn't simply aircraft procurement. That was India signaling to Europe we're available for strategic partnerships. France didn't merely sell jets. They co-created technology, educated Indian engineers, and supported India's indigenous defense objectives. That's a completely different model from traditional buyer-seller relationships. Then there's the India-UK 2030 framework, long-term cooperation on cyber defense, AI, clean energy, and digital commerce. It's not dramatic, but it's foundational. It's establishing frameworks lasting beyond news cycles. Don't overlook Israel either. India ranks among its largest defense clients and collaborators. Together, they've created advanced surveillance systems, drones, and missile defense technologies. But here's the development. India isn't just importing. They're co-creating, localizing, and integrating this technology into their own production ecosystems. This brings us to an important point. India isn't simply purchasing power. They're developing self-sufficient defense capabilities. By 2025, over 70% of India's military buying budget targeted domestic manufacturing. HAL, DRDO, Bharat Dynamics, these organizations aren't just government departments anymore. They're becoming worldwide defense suppliers. Regarding civilian matters, India is making intelligent moves too. They're quietly establishing bilateral trade relationships with UAE, Australia, South Korea, and EU. These aren't ceremonial agreements. These represent supply chain restructuring, green hydrogen partnerships, digital trade channels. India isn't waiting for worldwide agreement. They're building regional strength. They're also leading among global South nations, collaborating with Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America on infrastructure, education, and medicine access, not for domination, but for large-scale cooperation. Consider it like a distributed network. Decentralized, resilient, unaligned, yet connected. This is what Washington sometimes misses. India isn't refusing the West. They're balancing. They still participate in Quad activities. They still invest in American technology, but they also purchase Russian oil, acquire Israeli drones, and sign European climate agreements. This isn't defiance. This is called having choices. Honestly, that's what every country should pursue. A future where diplomacy isn't about choosing sides, but making intelligent, independent decisions. When Trump or other Amerifiates can leaders pressure India to conform? They're really saying, we don't want you selecting your own path, we want you following ours. That's outdated thinking. This century doesn't belong to any single nation. It belongs to networks of independent states that understand adaptation and collaboration. Currently, India is doing exactly that. Let's address the difficult question nobody in Washington wants discussing openly. Is America's worldwide influence declining? Short answer, not completely, but the exclusive control has ended. Long answer, it's complex. But yes, the balance shifts. Throughout most of the 20th century, America wasn't just a superpower, it was the power. Dollars controlled trade, Silicon Valley controlled innovation, the Pentagon controlled security, U.S. foreign policy determined who received what and when. But circumstances are changing rapidly. India's emergence isn't happening alone. It's part of larger patterns, decentralized rebalancing of global order. Consider it a system upgrade. We're transitioning from version 1.0, US-centered single polarity, to version 2.0, multipolar cooperation. That's where friction develops. America still possesses unmatched military strength, powerful global partnerships, and enormous cultural influence, undoubtedly. But regarding influence, the capacity to shape other countries' decisions without force, that control is weakening. Take the US dollar. It remains the primary reserve currency, but more countries, including India, are settling transactions in local currencies. India and Russia already trade oil in rupees. UAE just completed deals with India using rupees and dirhams, avoiding dollars completely. This doesn't mean dollar collapse tomorrow, but it indicates something deeper. Countries are exploring alternatives, and alternatives equal independence. Then consider diplomacy. India founded BRICS, now including major powers like Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa, and others. They're creating their own payment systems, energy networks, and development institutions. America isn't involved in those conversations. That's intentional. India also hosted the G20 summit recently and clarified their vision of global economy isn't centered on Western control. It's centered on shared growth, digital inclusion, and resilience. This is where things become interesting. America still views influence hierarchically top-down. You're either supporting us or opposing us, but countries like India see differently. Influence isn't command chains, it's trust networks. India's foreign policy doctrine is straightforward: multi-alignment, trade with America, purchase Russian arms, build UAE solar infrastructure, partner with Japan on semiconductors. That's not disloyalty, that's intelligent foreign policy for the 21st century. For America, that's difficult to accept because it means their playbook isn't being followed anymore. Trump's 25% tariff threat isn't just about trade statistics or oil agreements. It's reacting to eroding control. 10 years ago, America could achieve objectives with phone calls. Today, they must compete on pricing, influence, and diplomacy. So is America losing influence? It's not collapsing, but it's no longer the exclusive decision maker. In a world where India rises, Africa asserts itself, and Latin America reorganizes, American dominance isn't guaranteed. It's negotiable. The real challenge isn't India's strength. It's America's difficulty adapting to a world that doesn't wait for instructions. That's the direction we're heading, from command to cooperation. Here's terminology you'll hear frequently in Indian foreign policy discussions: strategic autonomy. It's not flashy or loud, but it's possibly one of the most disruptive concepts in 21st century geopolitics, because it really means we'll partner with everyone, but we won't obey anyone. For decades, the international system was binary. You belonged either to the American camp or Soviet one. But today, countries like India are reshaping that equation. They're declaring, we're not interested in being someone's satellite. We're interested in being independent, economically, militarily, and diplomatically. That's powerful. And that's exactly what frustrates Washington, because India isn't refusing cooperation. They're refusing alignment with conditions. America wants India committing fully to Western blocs, especially as tensions with China and Russia increase. But India's response has been clear. We'll work with you, but we'll determine the conditions. This became evident during the Russia-Ukraine conflict. America expected India to condemn Russia, follow sanctions, and sever energy connections. But India didn't. Not because they support warfare, they don't, but because they don't delegate their foreign policy to other capitals. They continued purchasing discounted Russian oil, ensuring energy security for 1.4 billion citizens. They maintained neutral positions at the United Nations, selecting diplomacy over division. Look at defense matters. India participates in joint U.S. Navy exercises while conducting military training with Russia and even China. That's not contradictory messaging. That's non-aligned pragmatism. India understands that genuine independence comes from having options, from not placing all security resources in one geopolitical basket. What makes India's position unique is they're not attempting to become the next traditional superpower. They're not invading countries. They're not establishing foreign bases. They're not promoting ideology. They're just building resilience through manufacturing, energy diversification, space technology, financial technology, and diplomacy. This type of self-determined behavior disrupts established power structures. America often expects loyalty in exchange for partnerships, but India offers something else: equal partnerships. They don't want being told who to trade with, who to sanction, or which side of history to support. They're choosing their own side, India's side. That's what any responsible nation should do. In a multipolar world, independence is the most valuable currency. India is accumulating it rapidly by being neutral when sensible, firm when necessary, and flexible when strategic. When Trump or any U.S. official complains that India isn't doing enough, they're really saying India isn't doing what we want. But that's the entire point. India doesn't need permission anymore. They need partners, not supervisors. Strategic autonomy isn't isolation. It's intelligent engagement. It's saying, we're in the room, we're at the table, but we're here on our own terms. That's not defiance. That's modern diplomacy. And India is perfecting it. So here we stand. A former U.S. president has threatened 25% tariffs on Indian exports. Negotiations are tense. Headlines are dramatic. But step back, zoom out, and the question becomes, what actually happens next? Here's what won't happen. India isn't going to panic. They aren't going to surrender under pressure, because this isn't 1990s India. This is 2025 India. A nuclear power, a space innovate, and the planet's largest democracy. The India that once depended on foreign assistance now launches satellites to the moon. The India that once negotiated from weakness now establishes G20 agendas. In this new world, economic threats don't function like they used to. Tariffs might cause temporary pain. Yes, Indian exporters in textiles, gems, and electronics could experience short-term difficulties. But long-term, this might actually speed up India's economic transformation. Indian trade officials are already strengthening connections with Africa, the EU, and Middle East. Bilateral agreements are being accelerated. Rupee-based settlements are expanding. Make in India